Hey folks, welcome back to the Metal Mill 52 workshop. My name is Bill, this is my shop. We're building an LBSC Tich locomotive, and this is what the boiler looks like. Everything's kind of screwed on, bolted down so far, and the next thing I want to do is work on the fire door. And luckily there's some good resources online, and also luckily for me, this boiler already had a little 1/8 inch square piece of bronze silver soldered to the back head, which sadly though there's not a hole drilled in it. I wish they had drilled a little hole there for the hinge pin, but it's not done. So I've got to do that, and I also have to figure out a way, probably either screwing or silver soldering a little base here for the latch. And I'll show you the resource that I'm looking at using here. If you would, well, first thing I did was to look at the plans in the book, page 217 and 218, talk about them. I took actual measurements of the areas on my boiler and sketched out some ideas that you can see here, pretty rudimentary on my graph paper. Next thing I did was I looked at some resources that I have, and if you Google John Bagley is apparently a British live steamer, and he published this article, 3.5-inch Tich boilers. Did a fantastic job, and I've blown up some of the pictures from the article. I'll be referring to this for the next several installments of this series, but you can see this photograph of the fire door for this boiler that he worked on. Pay particular attention to the latch assembly there. He screwed the little latch assembly onto the back head of the boiler with some 8BA bronze screws, he said. I'm thinking about something similar, or perhaps right there, maybe silver soldering on a little a bung that I can use as a base for the latch. So we'll get into that as we get closer. Also, I like the overall setup. He points out in the article that you got to be really careful here with that fitting for the lower part of the water sight gauge, which we've just fitted that on, and as you know, it sticks out quite a ways. So several things to think about, but really indebted to John and these great articles that he's published here. What I've done so far, not much, but I did fashion the little standoff piece. It's a 3/16 inch thick with a drilled and tapped section in the middle there. I went ahead and used 256. So this will separate the inner baffle from the outer door. And then I marked out some 1/16 inch or 16 gauge steel pieces and rough cut them to size for the baffle and for the outer door. So what I'm going to work on today is laying out the elliptical shape and finish bandsawing that to shape so it fits, drilling the hole in the center, of course, and the same thing for the outer door. That's what I hope to accomplish today. I've also laid out some additional pieces here, some things that I'm thinking about using: 1/8 inch brass rod and 1/16 inch brass pin material for the hinge pin. And I've got some 1/16 inch brass stock here and different pieces that I can use to make the hinges and perhaps the latch out of. So that's where we're at so far. I'll bring you back once I've created the elliptical shapes that will fit the fire door itself. I've taken my pieces, the stock, and measured the flat part of the oval, and that's what the outboard layout lines are. And then I could just draw in the oval edges, kind of scratch them in with my scriber. So I'll probably just hit this in the belt grinder for both of these pieces, just to bring them down to size. I'll start with, well, the first thing I'm going to do is drill the center hole. Well, these things are really relatively rectangular, and then I'll round the edges and fit them to the spaces. Here, I've shaped the outer door and the inner door. Let me show you the outer door first. That was not much to it, basically just cutting out the right size, drilling the center hole, and then rounding off the edges. I think that's going to be fine. I'll have to fasten the hinges to it. And this is the inner door. Now, what I've done is just rounded the edges a bit, and I've test fitted the first time. As you can see, it's not a good fit yet. It's a little large, so I'm just making note of a little bit off the top and the bottom. Mostly the width seems to be okay, and sharpening up those angles. So just test fitting using the magnetic end of my scriber so I can make a good fit there. Okay, here's the finished, well, not finished, but the fire door with the little baffle in place, and I've just got it bolted down right now. I'm thinking I'll either spot weld these with my little MIG welder, or I'll silver solder them. Maybe silver solder would be better. So that the baffle part fits inside pretty snugly, actually. Sorry, the light is terrible here, but as you can see, there'll be a little margin on the side there for the hinges, which should be perfect for allowing a little bit of pivot room. What I have in mind for the pivots of the hinges, thinking about drilling a 1/16 inch hole through that block, and then using brass, a little 1/8 inch brass rod with a 1/16 inch hole through it. Use the brass rod as my pivot points, and then just silver solder brass straps to the brass rod, rather than trying to curl a little teeny piece of brass strip. So that's the idea so far, and I'll start working on making the hinges, and then after the hinges, then the latch will be the critical piece. Getting ready to drill the 1/16 inch hole through the block there. I've got the boiler in the vise, but very gently I'm using wood, little popsicle sticks, soft wood, to hold it in place. And it's chalked up here in the front with wood and some brass strips too to make it steady. And I've just used the wiggler to line it up. So just hope I have a drill long enough. I'm not sure that's going to work there, but we'll see in a minute. I had an idea to help get a longer 1/16 inch drill bit, so I took this homeowner's one with a little hex stock on the back of it, and it was too fat. The hex was hitting the boiler, so what I've done is put it in the lathe and turned it down a bit. I've removed a bit of material. I'm going to check it now and see if that will give me the clearance that I need to finish drilling this hole. Oh, fingers crossed. Well, hallelujah, that worked. I actually had to turn down a lot longer portion of the shaft of the drill, but as you can see, let me lower it down, and you can see it sticking out there in the bottom, and thankfully it stayed pretty much on center, so I'm greatly relieved at that. And I'm going to stop for a little while, go inside, eat supper, and maybe come back and we can address the hinges. For the door pivots, I'm going to use 1/8 inch brass solid bar that I've drilled out a 1/16 of an inch hole in. I have 1/8 inch brass tube, but it's very thin walled, and it has like a 3/32 inch hole in the middle, and I didn't want to use a 3/32 inch pin on the little bar on the locomotive, so this will be fine. So I've just drilled this about 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to slice it off at little 1/8 inch intervals so that I can silver solder these to the hinges. One thing I'm going to do before I cut them off is to file a flat, just so that it won't roll so much on the hinge material. Here I'm holding up the finished door and one of the little brass straps that I cut, along with one of the brass hinge pieces, and I've got the brass rod in its place, so it's all looking pretty good. I think I'm going to go ahead and silver solder the brass hinge pieces to the brass straps tonight, and then we'll try screwing it together tomorrow. So here's the straps and the little the brass rods with the hole drilled and the little flat on them. So I'll put the flux on, then I can put the flat part down on both of them, and I'll put a little piece of silver solder there, Kozo style, and then heat them up and solder them together. And here's the hinges with the silver soldering complete. That one I got a little warm because it changed color, but you can see how nicely that worked. They did, when I heated them up, they did go off at a cockeyed angle. I was really glad I got this little scriber. I picked this up at my local Ace Hardware store for something like $1.99 last week, and it's really, really handy. It's the perfect thing for realigning the parts while everything was hot. So very happy with how that's done. I've dunked them in cold water, and I'll dunk them in the acid bath in a minute here. So here's the finished door, not finished, but the door ready with all the parts and pieces, the hinges and all that. And I would go ahead and fasten this down, but the critical piece is the offset. With this thing centered in the hole, the critical piece is the offset to the column on the right. So what I plan on doing is taping the door in place, and then putting the hinges in place too in the hinge, and then I'll just crazy glue them and hold them in steady. Let the crazy glue be the guide for me, and once that's dried, then I can just drill and tap and completely fasten the hinges to the door. And then the only other thing I have to do is figure out about the latch. I'll show one more thing before I glue these things in place. You can see I got the door taped in place, and I've got the first hinge basically ready. It's not perfectly aligned, but you get the idea. But I did crimp or bend the hinge plates, the hinge bars slightly, so that they will be flush with the door. I did that when it was in my little jig over there. Just press down on them with a pair of pliers. That's all I did. Okay, nothing fancy here. Trying to get some good light. So you can see I've got them crazy glued in position. Now all I've got to do is remove the tape, remove the pin, the hinge pin, and I'll be able to pull off the fire door with the hinges in the proper position. And then I can drill and tap them, screw the holes. Just was in the middle of tapping this hole here, and I've reminded myself why I love the universal pillar tool so much. I've got the drill here. I drilled the tapping size holes for the 080 screws is what I'm going to use here, and it's probably hard to see, but I got the tap, just threading it in by hand. No worries about misalignment or anything like that. Build a universal pillar tool, they're awesome. I'm playing around with some options for the Tich. Now this is my Allen Mogul. This is the fire door. You can see how much bigger that is, and of course you can see the propane burners inside there. So since it runs on propane, I don't have to open and close this a lot, but I do like the setup that I have here. It's just a small, like a 1/16 inch piece of steel, and it fits in a little notch, that goes like this. I don't know if you can see that right there, but that's cast into the firebox door the way it comes from Allen. I think all I had to do is probably file out the little opening there and then just fit everything together. It was very easy to put the firebox door in. I just drilled and tapped some holes, and that was that. So I like that idea, and you can see there's no interference here. There's plenty of room between the bottom of the water sight glass on the large 7.5 inch gauge locomotive. So that was very easy to do. What I think I'm going to do, let me pull back and show you the Tich over here. I think I'm going to do something similar. I put the lower part of the sight glass in place, and you can see how very tight it is. The good news is the door opens and closes no problem, so there's no actual interference there. But coming up with a latch that doesn't interfere with the bottom of the sight glass is going to be tricky. Luckily, I have a piece of bronze, a little rectangular piece of bronze. It looks like I cut this off from something else, not even quite sure. But what I think I'm going to do is cut this, machine it, and drill and tap a few holes in it. Then I can silver solder this to the bottom of the boiler here, right underneath. You can see where I've marked it. Kind of silver solder that to the boiler, and then with the holes that I've got drilled, I can put a piece of steel and just screw it onto this piece, and it'll act as a little catch, a little like I showed over on the Mogul. So I'm going to work on designing that tonight, and it should be pretty easy and pretty reliable solution. Once you've got an anchor point, so to speak, silver soldered to the boiler, then you can adjust accordingly. Oh, the other thing I think I'm going to have to do is to have the latch. It'll be smaller than this, but it can't be centered on the same screw that holds the baffle in, because if it did, it would interfere with the bottom of the water sight gauge. So it's going to have to be lower like this. That's why I marked that Sharpie marker portion, but I can put it just below, and I should, and make, as long as I can make it short, it should have enough room to raise up and down and still clear the sight gauge. Here's the roughly fashioned latch mechanism I had in mind. As you can see, it's got the bronze, which I'll plan to silver solder to the boiler. Little brass screws. These are 080 screws that are holding it in, and that's a piece of 1/16 inch steel, which I've bent into a little cup shape. And I can make that tighter if I need to. I thought, I can modify the whole thing to make the right fit for the little latch arm that will go there. So just wanted to show this little close-up beforehand to kind of the roughed out idea. And right now I'm going to cut the bottom part off here and grind off the screws on the bottom here, and then do a little test fit. I'll bring you back for the test fit. Okay, I don't know how much sense this will make, but I'm holding the little latch in my left thumb. You can see the door is closed, and I've just fabricated a little piece of brass angle, or strip of brass. My thought is to have it anchored further to the right of the center, and as you can see, I've notched it as well, so it'll lift up, it'll clear the latch, and it won't hit the bottom of the sight gauge. We'll play with that some more later, but pretty good start anyway. Here's the boiler removed from the chassis and obviously set face down on the workbench. And I've roughly lined things up. I've obviously also removed the bottom of the water sight gauge and just taken a few pictures. It's getting kind of late for me tonight, but I wanted to line this up and just take a look at it. I can think about it and decide if I want to silver solder that bracket into place just like it is. You can see there's a little gap between the steel part of the bracket and the door. I could either use a thicker latch on the door, or I can always mash that steel down a little bit. That'd be the easiest way to do it. That's 1/16 inch strip steel here that I can bend that down a little bit too to tighten things up. That's part of the reason I wanted to have the latch part screwed on, because that way it'd be completely adjustable. And then these other little marks that I put in place here, I was thinking this would be the pivot spot, and then make a little handle here that would raise up. And you can see pretty clearly now why I notched out the end of the arm, so it would clear the base of the water gauge. Let me see if I can twist this up. You see how that's going to have to clear. I can also reduce the length of that steel latch to give a little more room for movement. Here's the back of the boiler with the new latch in place. Let me show you what I did. I scrapped the little piece of strip steel and decided to use a piece of 1/4 inch key stock. And as you can see, I first milled out a space, a 1/16 of an inch, to catch the latch. Then I milled the back down by a 1/16 of an inch as well. Drilled 2 holes that match the holes for the slightly off center holes for that was in the spring steel, or the steel strip. And then I ground a little ramp, the idea being that if I slam the door shut, the latch should slide up over the ramp just like it does on my mogul. I may have to refine that shape a little bit more, but so I've laid it out, put it in position, tested the fit with the latch, and it looks good. Now I used my punch, my spring-loaded punch, to make a couple of little divots there. I don't know if that'll work, but to try to keep the thing from moving around, because the next step is to silver solder. I'm going to take the steel part off and then try silver soldering the bronze base to the back of the boiler there, and then I can screw the steel strip in place. So we'll see how that works. Once that's done, then I can just fix the latch. There's the piece of material for the latch in place, and silver solder the baffle and all that together, and we should be done with the fire door. Yeah, here's the bar in place, and I cleaned it off with some sandpaper, the boiler that is, and cleaned the surface, prepped it, and I've put the piece of bronze there, and I've got some little pieces, they look giant in the video here, but little pieces of silver solder that will hopefully melt and form a nice fillet and bond that bronze onto the back of the boiler. And I've got my large torch out again to do that as well, as you can see. So I won't be videoing that part, but I'll bring you back. Hopefully it'll work good. Well, not beautiful, but it seems to have held. It looks like I got a good solder joint there. And I can tell that the solder flowed pretty well, because I actually had to drill out this hole here and re-tap it. I actually ran the tap through both of them, but it seems solid. I'm going to let it set overnight here, and I'll clean it up a little bit more tomorrow. But I think we're good to go. So the next step after this will be to test fit everything, and then I can mount the actual latch onto the door. And then once that's done, then I can silver solder the baffle onto the door and test everything. I think we're coming around the home stretch here. I'm pretty excited about that. Here's a better angle, better light there. Looks pretty decent, actually. I think I'll go ahead and wrap it up here. As you can see what I've done, I took the little piece of brass, I silver soldered a little L-shaped tang for a handle onto it, and it's a nice snug fit there. I also silver soldered the baffle, the little nut for the baffle, and the baffle thing to the main door. So, and I drilled and tapped a little hole for a 080 screw here, a little stainless steel screw right there. But it makes nice firm close. I may have to trim this part down a little bit to give a little clearance with the sight gauge, the water sight gauge. But there's a side view of it. Pretty happy with how it came out. It should be easy enough to open, even using a small coal shovel to lift that tang, which is silver soldered on there. So, like I said, this will be the last segment of this episode. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Ask any questions that you have. Again, I'm not saying this is the perfect way to go, but it looks like a practical solution for me. And next time I think I'll be working on the steam header in the front here. So that goes right in the center. And getting ready to finish up the boiler. So hope that was interesting. Please ask questions, give a thumbs up, pass the word, and help me grow the channel. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.